Welcome to another episode of How to Start, Grow and Monetize Your Podcast with me, Alex Chisnall, and my co-host, James Burtt.
Hi there, everybody.
So we are here today to talk about how to structure your podcast show. So we are going to run through different formats that you have, from an interview-based podcast to a solo episode to having a co-host like this podcast. Yes.
There's many formats. Now, back in the day when we both got started, we make ourselves sound really old now.
But we're not.
Back in our day, but you're really direct, but we're not. Like we're young and youthful. When we first started, podcast really was two people having a conversation in a long form. That was kind of it. It was a long format style of content creation. But over the preceding 7-8 years that we've both been doing podcasts, and over the preceding 20 years that podcasting has existed, it has really changed its focus and format. So it's long gone are the days of it just having to be two people having a conversation. It might be, we would laugh, we've got so many blooper reels, sorry, so if we start to snigger, that is why. But solo shows are really good if you're trying to grow your expertise and your authority. I'm sorry.
He's lost it, but we're going to carry on with this episode. We're just going to cut this bit out. So when I started my show, least barrier to entry for me was literally just me talking on my laptop and being able to reach guests all around the world, one-to-one format, me interviewing a guest. Quite often, though, the easiest format is what we're actually doing now, is getting somebody you know, a friend, to talk about a subject you're both passionate with, because you can bounce off each other, as you might have heard, okay, with the different bloopers we've got just from this one episode of one of us losing it and laughing their head off because we're having so much fun talking about podcasting. So maybe think about, in your inner circle, who do you think shares the same passion as you and who would be interested in creating content on a particular topic. If it's more of a branded podcast in the business space, who else in your organization has a degree of knowledge about the topics you're going to be covering in that business?
There's a couple of different core considerations. When you're looking at like interview podcasts, for example, are great because you can extend the reach of your show by the guests that you have on. Obviously, if me and Al were doing this as an interview format of each other, then potentially I could share it out across my network, Al could share it out across his network, and effectively that podcast gets double the reach. And also, people will come back for the guest as much as they'll come back, or if not more, they'll come back for the host, if that makes sense. So, pound in the box. But Diary of a CEO, for example, great podcast, biggest show in Europe, one of the top 10 shows in the world. I actually only listen to that show if I'm interested in the guest. I think Stephen Bartlett is a very good host, don't get me wrong, but I only listen if I can hear from someone whose expertise and knowledge that I really want to grow from. A lot of the stuff I just don't tune into. Same with all of the podcasts that I listen to. It doesn't matter how much I like the person, I'm tuning in really to listen to the conversation of the hosts. However, having said that, that's sort of on the interview side of things. Solo shows are amazingly powerful for growing expert authority, becoming the thought leader and the influencer within your space, and to show a level of acumen and expertise. So when the pandemic hit, I launched a podcast agency because, frankly, I needed to do something because everything else that I'd done out in the real world all of a sudden evaporated overnight. And I started doing interview-based podcasts because that's what my show, Building a Brand, was all about. But then I actually documented the growth of the podcast agency in real time. I did it as solo episodes. I did it pretty much every day. And I've talked about everything from landing my first client who paid me 150 quid to make them a jingle, doing my first month where I made £7,425.
Wow.
I talked about the day when, in the pandemic, when I had a brown envelope land through the door from HMRC and they were like, "Dear Mr. Burtt, we would like to let you know that you owe us £14,000 of outstanding VAT and you've got 6 days to pay it." And I had £0 in the bank. Now, I've shared all that stuff for solo shows and I got so much engagement from people, and I probably won business off people because they're like, "Oh, I like this guy. He knows what he's talking about." And also, probably with the 14 grand tax bill, they're like, "I want to help this guy out a little bit. He's in a hole." But I was actually able to sort of raise my authority and my expertise during that time because of the solo show. So don't think you have to just do an interview show. Solos work really well for expertise and building your authority in a particular space. The other thing that I think could work really well these days, and again, when we first started, this was definitely not a thing, is like roundtables. You can see with like overlap and the rest is football or whatever it's called.
Yeah.
There's a load of like sporty ones, but there's lots now where there's a bunch of different people with different opinions, because that is almost the audio or the media version of a chat around a pub table. I mean, some of them are chats around a pub table.
Talk show, like when you at the end of the show and you've got all of the guests out on the sofa, whether it's Jay Leno or whether
Jonathan
it's
Ross or
Graham
Norton.
Yeah, exactly that. I think for audio, for me, there's definitely a number that you don't want to cross, and then you start losing how many voices are actually on there. And I think it's about, for me, about 4. So you've got a host and you might have got 3. It's tough. It's a tough gig.
Yeah.
Different on video, as you'll see from those chat shows. But yet again, that's my personal opinion. And then, you've got other podcasts. I'd say, especially in the, what's the right phrase? Criminology.
True crime?
True crime, most popular podcast niche, in case you didn't know that.
Yes.
Number 1 category, most popular. But
isn't that mad that the most popular category of podcast is true crime?
Totally throws me every time. Yeah. And you've got comedy, things like that. So, there are a number of different formats how you can do this. We did an audit on a podcast, and he was reading bedtime stories.
Yes, he was, yeah.
So solo episode, but he's reading fiction to the audience to help them get to sleep. Again, comedy's going to have its own one. True crime, you're going to have different characters. So it's like an audio play. Again, so lots of different formats that you can play around with.
One of the things, and I've got some notes here, which is what I'm looking at my screen, but one of the things it says about is the... think of the format that is right based on the goals and outcomes of your audience. This is really important, and maybe we've not hammered it enough on this podcast just yet. But when you hit the record button, when you do anything related to the content creation around your podcast, think about what is in it for them, what is in it for that ideal listener. We should do a future episode about the ideal listener.
We will.
Exercise. We should really tie into that. But again, you might be making content because you want to consume it, or you want to have a conversation with that person, whatever it may be. But think before you start to record, what kind of format is needed to get my audience the outcome that I'm promising them with this podcast. Another great format, and again, this is great from a business outcome perspective, because we often talk about this, that a podcast is a format, it's a leg of your content stool, effectively. It is it's an arm of your marketing. And if you're trying to grow a personal brand, or you're trying to grow a business, utilising the power of podcasting, it's super powerful for that. So one of the things that, if you're a small business, chances are you do discovery calls, sales calls, whatever it may be. How about, instead of doing discovery calls, you actually do live coaching sessions? If you're a coach, a mentor, a consultant, then why not get people on, especially these tricky customers, we've all had them, right? You've got that tricky customer. You've done the sales call, they've been through your funnel, they've downloaded your thing, they're on your mailing list, they respond, they've had a phone call with you, you've sent them a proposal, you haven't quite got them to jump off the fence. They're still there, they want more information. Can we have a follow-up call? Can we have another follow-up call? And another. Sack that off, get rid of the discovery calls, and say to them, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Smith, I understand that the challenge that you've got, it feels really unique to you right now, but honestly, from coaching the people that I have, I know that there is so many other people who are in exactly your position. It obviously feels big and scary and unique when you're in the midst of it, but trust me, there's loads of people going through this. I'll tell you what, instead of us doing another discovery call, what I'd love to do is, I can't coach everybody on a one-to-one basis, but I would love to do a session with you. But I'd love to record that session so I can help you on a personal one-to-one basis. But from that content, you and I can help so many other people on a one-to-many basis by creating it as a podcast. Are you cool for me to do that?
I am.
It's fantastic. What is your deepest problem, Alex Chisnall? Tell me. But in that format there...
Launching this podcast right now.
Your addiction to paddle. But then from that instance there, you can then share your expertise, your acumen. You can actually show what you do. Because it's one thing for you to say, hey, I'm brilliant at XYZ for these reasons. It's quite another for someone else to come to that realisation themselves. And that's what can happen if you share your expertise, your acumen. I'm hearing it loads with like coaching podcasts work really well.
Yeah.
If you've got
coaching's the obvious one.
There's a brilliant one called The Product Boss, which is part of the HubSpot network, and she talks to other e-com businesses and gives them coaching and guidance, and she's got like a multi-billion pound brand online. It's just brilliant content where you can actually show the acumen and the expertise that you can give to other people, and you're not having to think about content curation or creation at that point. You're just helping one other person who also happens to be the ideal audience for your podcast and your content.
I thought of another one recently with a client as well. So they've got a business with like 350 other businesses on site in the music space. So most of those businesses are in the music industry. His job as the CEO of that business is basically to keep everybody happy on site. So he has conversations with all of those businesses on a regular basis, and finding out, what else do they need? What else can we service you with? We've built this amazing music studio for you. We've kitted it out for you. What else can we help you with? I'm like, if you've got to have those conversations anyway, you've actually got podcast studios on site. Can't you just throw them behind a desk and hit the big red record button and have that conversation and then put it out there? Because when you're meeting a guest for your podcast, whether it's in person or online, for me, yes, the conversation, the main content is super important, but the time you spend with before the recording with your guest and after the recording with your guest is more important. Yeah. Well, as equal, if not more important, because then, you're breaking the ice to start with if you've never met them before. But in this case, you're cementing that relationship, and you're arranging to meet again on the downside of it. And, who doesn't like being asked about themselves, especially people potentially in the music industry? They're going to love somebody asking them about what they've achieved with their lives. So for me, it's like, just want to have those conversations, but record them and have them on a podcast.
We've got a bunch of clients who also use it as a business development tool. So
Same.
Especially in the recruitment sector.
Yeah, leadership, ours is, yeah.
So recruitment is very linear. It's a very transient conversation. Hello, have you got a people requirement right now? If yes, great, can we tender for the work? If not, no, cool, I'll call you back in 6 months. See you later, bye. But when you shift that and go, hey, we've got a podcast about transformational leadership within your sector and space, I'd love to get you on. I'd love to get one of your C-suite team on, whether it be the head of procurement or the head of sales or the marketing director, or whoever it may be from that business. Now, all of a sudden, instead of you going cap in hand, going, hey, I've got something that I want to sell you, you shift the power dynamic entirely. And now all of a sudden, you're the person with the value in the proposition rather than the person with the ask. And then you're, like you say, what triggered it was the cementing the relationship that you mentioned a second ago. Then you're making content. You're going to make that guest look and feel like a rock star. They're going to want to share it out with their extended network. They're probably going to put it onto LinkedIn, into Instagram, into Facebook, into TikTok and all that stuff. You make them clips and a trailer and all the rest of it. Then you are cementing a relationship. You're spending more face-to-face time with them. They're getting more opportunity to buy into you before they will buy from you. And it's all done under the guise of this podcast. So don't think about a podcast and the format and the structure of an interview is with me and a celebrity, or a solo show has to be me reading off a script. You can use it as a biz dev tool. You could do it as a roundtable conversation. If there's 4 or 5 of you within an industry, why not have a roundtable conversation? You might be sitting there going, well, why would I want to, share the stage with my competitors? Effectively, me and you operate in the same space.
Correct.
We just happen to be great pals as well, but we are in the same sector in the space. All boats rise on a high tide is our belief. Some will resonate with me. Probably not that many. More will resonate with you. And that expertise, then people will potentially become clients, etc. But we get to have a great conversation. We could bring other podcast agency owners in or other content creator owners in. And again, that is just a great different format. And also, if you do that round table thing, if there's, say, like 3 or 4 of you, maximum 4, because the rest of it really does become a headache, there's 4 people all promoting that podcast.
Yeah.
The extended reach of that across each other's networks is absolutely massive. So the days of it being you and another person sat having a 60-minute conversation about their life, about that time when they had a big challenge or whatever it may be, those times are gone. Roundtables, solo shows, discovery calls, consultancy calls, all of that can now become your content if you do it in the right way.
Also, just to chuck that in there, you mentioned I've got clients who use it as an onboarding tool for their new employees. Yeah. So they to get them to literally listen to the podcast, and then they got to fill out a worksheet as part of the onboarding process as well. You've also got, instead of intranets, you've now got podcasts being used as an internal vehicle to share company news with the rest of the staff.
Private podcast,
Yeah. And, ultimately, 2 of us ultimately competitors in the same space coming together, because podcasting has genuinely changed both our lives, and we want more people to experience what we've experienced with our lives and changing the trajectory of our lives. And ultimately want to drive everybody to go to Pod School, where you can join our free community, where we will continue helping you, but giving you more hands-on, exclusive content, guests from some of the top 100 podcasts in the world to share their stories and how they built their podcast from absolutely nothing to top 100 podcasts, and again, how podcasting changed their lives.
Absolutely. If you've enjoyed this episode, please feel free to leave us a 5-star review. Honestly, I know you probably hear it on loads of podcasts. It really, really genuinely helps if you leave us a review. We would appreciate it massively. Maybe we'll give you a shout out on a future episode. We've got loads of cool ideas for the show coming up. We might do some coaching sessions ourselves. If you've got a challenge, you could probably send us a voice note. We'll be doing that through the Pod School community again, and then we'll be solving your challenges. Upcoming episodes include creating a content plan, podcast branding, recording and editing like a pro, launching your podcast, building an audience on social media, and how to monetize your podcast, as well as guest episodes as well. So if that sounds like your cup of tea, hit the follow button and you can make sure you never miss an episode. Click the link in the show notes now. We'll see you over in Pod School, and we'll see you on the next pod.